Subaru gave his left arm a strong swing, checking the conditions his broken fingers were in. They hurt, and so while feeling this pain, that would fade no matter what, Subaru steeled himself so that it wouldn't become a hindrance for him when he ran over. And then, zah! Putting some muscle into it, he pushed a smallish fallen tree from the large hole up to the ground above. The very next moment, an arrow that came towards them at insane speeds pierced into the fallen tree that he'd pushed up. The impact wrenched it away from his arms, forcefully pushing him backwards. Whoa! Looking at that from the corner of his eyes, Subaru crawled out of the large hole and stepped firmly into the rough ground. There were limits to how quick the hunter could fire off their bow, no matter how confident they were with their archery. Unlike with guns, you have to notch the arrow, draw the bowstring, and then take aim. This time lag gave Subaru the merest ray of hope for survival. "It's coming faster," she said that the moment he'd crawled out the large hole and kicked out his first step. Time-wise, only 2 seconds had passed since the first arrow had blown away the fallen tree he'd used as a decoy. Nevertheless, for a skilled hunter, those 2 seconds were plenty sufficient. Damn it. The ground behind Subaru exploded straight after he heard Rem's voice ringing out. The fact he had tensed up in the place and hadn't gone into a defensive stance at a call proved to be the right course of action. More specifically, his nerves weren't quite in tune enough to be able to respond to a call. However, that turned out to be alright in the end. And just like that, arrows came flying towards Subaru as he ran to his tree, one after another, each in the space of less than 2 seconds. If any of them had made it to him, he would have been turned into a hedgehog in the blink of an eye. However, "I won't allow that to happen." The hunter's next tap was interrupted by a clump of dirt which Rem had flung out, along with a valiant cry. With her back against the slope of the large hole, it had been something thrown by Rem. No, it had been a ferocious attack which you could even call a bombardment, made from a large stone covered in dirt. Subaru, though it would have been best if she knew how to use her magic. When they'd been confirming how much she could fight, Rem had shown a disapproval for using the power of her Onihorn, magic and such. To be more exact though, in truth, she couldn't remember how to use them. Nevertheless, they couldn't waste time trying to get her to remember those techniques. For that reason, what Subaru suggested to her instead was her physical strength, which she still had in her, even if she didn't have her techniques. Getting in the way via some rather primitive violence, using the physical intrinsic to the Oni tribe by birth, an attack born of the strike of the hunter, who had maintained their position, dismissing Subaru and Rem as weaklings. Subaru, you know that saying, "A cornered rat will bite the rat." Then get a load of this! Subaru leapt over the shockwave, which the arrow had produced right under his feet as he let out a bellow. Meanwhile, in his field of view, a large stone thrown by Rem went flying towards the direction that the hunter had loosened their arrow from. Gah! When face to face with an enemy, Rem didn't know how to go easy on him, and that was Rem's best feature. She'd gathered those stones just to be safe, yet they quickly became dangerous weapons from just the act of throwing them from her slender arms. Well, whilst Rem buying me time, While Rem smashed up the sniper file with her bombardment, levering the use of her appropriate weaponry, Subaru made it to the tree in question. As that raged on, he walked around to the back of the large tree. There, the figure of Louis flew into his sight, sleeping in a bed of her own golden hair inside the rotten hollow. Subaru, ... He caught sight of her rosy red cheeks, as well as her chest gently heaving up and down, confirming that she was alive and well. And so, as he tried to reach his arms around her body, Subaru felt a strong sense of rejection within himself. Even though he tried not to act without bringing personal feelings into it, his soul, rather than his mind, rejected Louis. This was a sin archbishop. Even if now it was an innocent sleeping face she was showing, she was a traitor that went beyond forgiveness. "Stop dawdling, please!" His indecision was shattered by Rem, urging him on. The moment he heard that, Subaru somehow bit down his sense of rejection and picked Louis up. And then, whilst having a hold of her light body, he jumped out of the tree's hollow and started to make his way back to Rem. Huh? When suddenly, a black shadow blocked his path, having leapt out right in front of his eyes. The assumption was that he'd take the same path to get back to the large hole. Subaru hadn't imagined that something like this would be on its way there. He looked up at the shadow that was so suddenly made present, and then he was lost for words. The gargantuan shadow had slipped through the forest, making nary a sound, and was now blocking Subaru's way. It was a huge snake, probably about 10 meters in length. Its entire body was covered in tightly packed green scales, and its eyes were yellow. Spotting the twisted white horn on their sudden intruder's forehead, Subaru realised what its identity was. A witch beast! Faced with its imposing appearance, ever so near to him, Subaru rued his foolish oversight. Subaru himself should have taken note of this, of the fact that where he was right now, he was letting off the witch's lingering scent, the strongest he'd ever done so. So it's inevitable that Subaru would be attracting witch beasts to him, just as had happened in the Olria sand dunes, and just as it happened in prior times before now. He should have known that inside of a dingy forest like this, which had few people going in and out of it, it would be an ideal dwelling place for witch beasts. The huge snake opened its gaping mouth wide open, settling its aim on Subaru. Its gaping mouth seemed plenty big enough to swallow not just Subaru himself, but Louis as well, whom he was carrying in his arms. Seeing it drawing nearer to him, Subaru's perception of time crawled to a halt. Oh, this is bad. Subaru felt like he was feeling these feelings of someone else entirely. Seeing the world flickering ever so slowly and languidly was something so close to the times where you'd see your life flashing before your life, so to speak. In regards to this topic, there were theories along the lines of it being the mind's way of looking for a solution using what had been experienced in life up to this point, as death looms. But when it comes to Subaru, no matter how much he racked his mind, he couldn't find anything like having an arrow escape from being gobbled up by a huge snake. If he forced himself, the closest he could find involved a swarm of rabbits, but that was one memory he wished to reject, even when it came to his life flashing before his eyes. Having wasted a few brief moments on such pointless thoughts, Subaru's shoulders then slumped. As he cursed his body for having stirred into action to protect Louis so quickly, they were about to be swallowed, headfirst into the snake's huge gaping mouth. Szzz! Whoa! Subaru reflexively closed his eyes when something dripping wet poured down on top of his head. An unpleasant thought ran through his mind, that's for sure. It was a type that spread its digestive juices out before its meals. However, that was not the case. What caked Subaru's entire body was darkish blood that had been sprayed everywhere. It was a tremendous amount of blood that the huge snake had spat from its jaws, having had its body pierced by a sharp arrow.